Today, we speak to the leader of an organization that empowers young adults to advocate for higher education, healthcare, and economic policies. Stay tuned as we learn about their dedication to advocacy engagement for our youth.
Participate, engage, speak out, use your voice to be an effective advocate. The Voices in Advocacy podcast examines the diverse landscape of advocacy, exploring the ins and outs of building influence, driving change, and creating champion advocates. It's now time for the Voices in Advocacy podcast with your host, Roger Rickard.
Welcome to the Voices in Advocacy podcast, and I hope you're enjoying season 5. I'm Roger Rickard, president and founder of Voices in Advocacy, where we work with organizations to inspire, educate, engage, and activate your supporters by turning them into effective, influential advocates. And this is the podcast dedicated to the art of advocacy. This podcast is for the people that work and engage in advocacy efforts for their organizations, be they corporations, associations, trade organizations, and nonprofit cause groups. Now, let's get started. On today's show, we speak with Kristin McGuire, the Executive Director for Young Invincibles. Kristin assumes this role, having most recently served as Young Invincibles West Region Director, where she empowered young adults to advocate for higher education, healthcare, and economic policies. She brings years of community organizing and policy change experience to her role. Kristin is a first-generation college student from a single-parent household and is driven by a deep understanding of the needs of under-resourced communities while helping shift power to young adults from these communities over the last decade. Keeping true to her commitment to civic engagement, Kristin is the first African-American elected to the school board in Covina, California. While very proud of her work, Kristin's most prized accomplishment is not her own. It is her mother's, who integrated her school in Alabama at age 7. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Kristin McGuire to today's show. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I shared pre-show that I am very excited to have you on because I absolutely believe, first and foremost, that we must have the youth involved. We must have the young people understand how our government works, why it's important, what their say is, and how their voice works. So let's begin by telling people about how Young Invincibles went from a small group run out of a school cafeteria to a national young adult advocacy organization in less than 15 years.
Sure. The story is the thing that movies are made of, right? You think about Saved by the Bell, right? Friends at college during the time where President Obama was really talking about the Affordable Care Act and how insurance companies had really counted out young adults, saying that we considered ourselves invincible and would not enroll in a healthcare plan because we did not believe we needed healthcare. And at that time, that group of friends said, what if we took the power of that name and we are young and we are invincible, but we actually care deeply about healthcare? And so it really just started with this group of college friends amplifying voices of young adults, which later became our mission of sharing stories of young people who recognized that they needed health insurance and that the Affordable Care Act would be something amazing for young adults. So that group and that project became what we now know today as Young Invincibles, the nation's largest young adult focused policy and advocacy organization.
Yeah, we're going to get into the size of this. And so, folks, if you had no clue, you wait till you hear the size of how this has grown during this period of time. You mentioned your mission, which is to amplify the voices of young adults in a political process. You have 5 values that you list. What are they?
Our values are young adult power, equity, community, collaboration, and bold ideas. And the fun story behind that is we actually got groups of young adults, our staff, and we had several focus groups and a few years ago, and we thought about what really brings us to the work, what drives our work, what values that we want to center in our work as we continue to move forward in the policy work. And this is what we came up with. So this wasn't, the group of executives coming up with words that were buzzwords at the time. This was really a labor of love for the young people who participate in our Young Invincibles activities, and it was very staff driven.
Yeah, from the ground up, grassroots.
Absolutely.
Absolutely great. Okay, let's get into this so that people understand the size. You boast 500,000 in your network. How does one learn about and become a part of your network?
Sure. So the easiest way to become a part of our network is to follow us across our social media channels at Young Invincibles. We then have increased opportunities for participation. We have leadership development programs in our 5 state offices, which are in California, Colorado, Illinois, New York, and Texas. We also have youth advisory boards at the state level, as well as a national youth advisory board where young people can connect. And we also have folks who participate with us digitally by participating in virtual focus groups, webinars, surveys, to ensure that the young adult voice is heard throughout the political process.
As part of the network, are they required to really do anything other than to just kind of sign up and follow along and granted, you want them to participate and you want them to take the action, but are there any kind of requirements other than that up front?
No, so our base is 18 to 34-year-old young adults. Many are college or former college students. There is no monetary fee to participate. Our goal here, and what we're really the most proud of at Young Invincibles, is that we're able to take really complex policy issues and break them down into consumable pieces so young people can understand what's happening and how policy directly impacts them. So if young people attend a webinar to understand what the EITC tax credit is, what it means, or what expansion could look like, that's all we ask, is learn the information and share the information.
So within your team, how are you coming up with developing the information that you're sharing?
Sure. So I think
policy advisors or
we are the policy advisors. So really what it looks like is when we survey young adults and do focus groups, that helps form our policy agenda every year. Of course, if you think of the issue areas as the guardrails, as those are the issues that we will focus on, but what the nuance looks like comes directly from young adults. From there, we have policy directors on staff in every state and federally, and we kind of look at what the survey has provided to us. We look at what's going on in the state and federal political landscape, and we create a policy agenda alongside our National Youth Advisory Board and our state youth advisory boards. And then we begin to create consumer education from there.
Okay. So you have federal issues that you're working on. I would assume because you're in offices in 5 other states, that those states, you've been working on some issues at the state level as well, for that. Really generically, what are your key issues right now that's out there?
Our issue areas are healthcare, and under healthcare, we work on expansion, access, affordability. We have higher education, so that's your access, affordability. So that's where you'll see our financial aid work, our basic needs work. We have workforce and finance. That's where you'll see our tax policy work. You'll also see, depending on the states, you'll see apprenticeship work, job creation work. And then we have civic engagement, where there are voter rights, voter expansion, voter protection work throughout the states and nationally.
And I understand that you've had some great success.
We have.
I mean, working on stronger consumer protections in the health insurance areas, uh, helping protect funding for Pell Grants,
Yes.
uh, increased aid to lower income college students,
Mm-hmm.
expanding funding for college community colleges. This is pretty impressive.
I tell people when folks say, what do I like most about my job? I really feel like we're a lot of like the Clark Kents, right? No one's ever going to know that we are the people doing the work that we do. However, it touches people's daily lives. And for me, that's the thing that's the most special about the work. I can sit here in California and know, even though no one else knows, that we were directly responsible for allowing college students to have better access to the SNAP benefits out here. And so I get to know firsthand, whereas when I was in college and I went to apply for SNAP, I was not permitted to because I didn't work a work study job. I worked, a regular part-time job. And now college students can apply and get it and not have those barriers and hurdles. So that's like my Clark Kent moment where I'm just walking around being Clark Kent, but nobody knows that at YI we're really Superman.
The only problem with that Clark Kent analogy is that where are the phone booths today?
That's a good point.
You got to change somewhere.
Got to change somewhere. That is so true.
Exactly. Wonderful. That is great, and the work that is being done is fabulous. You have a group called Young Advocates, which is a paid leadership program. There's going to be a couple comment or questions with this, but tell us about that program and how it works.
Sure. So this is a program that's very near and dear to my heart. It's a paid leadership development program for young adults. The only prerequisite is that you fall within our age range of 18 to 34. And once you get accepted into the program, every state has the program. It varies in size from 10 to 20 folks. It's a semester basis. And you learn everything that we can teach you in the semester basis of policy, advocacy, storytelling, narrative shift, community organizing, and really take young people who, in a sense, have had very little experience with the political process, the policy process, and we get them to the point where we're taking them to the state capitol and they're advocating for bills that they've helped develop. And what's most special to me about this program, like you said, I was the Western Region Director prior to this, is that we have folks join our program who didn't even know that they were allowed, let alone in the state capitol. They didn't even know they could go to their city hall because they didn't know that the space was available to them. One of our activities is go to your city hall, city council meeting, see what services your city hall provides. And then when we go to the state capitol, you'll kind of see those similarities. And we've been told time and time again, I didn't know that I was allowed to go in the state capitol. I didn't know it was open to the public.
Well, that addresses a bigger issue, which is civic education in our school system. And so that should be maybe something that gets on the agenda to help protect, because they don't have an idea. In fact, one of the things that I do when I speak to every group, it doesn't matter, is I make them read the preamble to the Constitution, almost like they're taking an oath. Please stand, repeat after me. Boom, 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 boom. And we know that begins with we the people. And then when I'm done with that, I say, you notice it began with we the people. It didn't say I the king,
yep,
or me the president,
yep,
or we the Congress.
That's right.
It says we the people.
That's
We're the
right.
people that have the right. And then, on and on and on and on. So I absolutely think that that's important. Advocacy engagement. Why is it even more important for young people than anybody else?
Well, that is a big question, and there's a lot of answers for that. I'll say, I think when we kind of visualize the country that we want to live in, or even when we think about what is the United States, how we envision it, what is the best version of us that we can be, What we do know is that millennials, Gen Z, future generations are the most diverse generations we've seen in this country, and it will continue to follow that trend, whereas every generation will be more diverse than the next generation. So it's important for young people to be involved because we're going to need our decision makers, our policymakers to reflect what our country actually looks like. And then when I talk about diversity in age and every other type of diversity, it's really important that we have impacted people helping guide the decisions of our country. The other reason this is important is because policy affects us all. And so when we hear things like, oh, that's politics, I don't deal in politics, you do. Willingly or unwillingly, you absolutely
every day.
Every single day. The gas you put in your car, whether your car is allowed to be a gas vehicle, like everything we do on a day-to-day, but if you don't drive, but you catch the bus, the transit system, how the condition of your roads is what I tell young people. You don't deal in politics, but if there's a pothole and it bends your rim, do you know where to go?
The tax of your latte in the morning.
Absolutely.
You know,
so that's another reason why it's important to be involved in advocacy. And then the last reason I would say is, who better to make the decisions than the people that it's actually impacting? Who better to say how much a tuition increase should be than the folks who have to pay it?
I agree with that. And of course, we know the old saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Absolutely.
And by having a seat at that table, and we're seeing that in all kind of things. I'm an avid golfer, and I just, the whole policy thing and everything that's going on with the professional golf tour, the PGA, and now players have more seats at the table than they had before. So having that seat at the table is important. But once you get that seat at the table, how are you going to talk to them? So storytelling is really important. And you have a storytelling program. So first, why is it important? And then what is the program? How does it work? How could somebody be educated in that?
Sure. So storytelling is a component of our overall goal to kind of shift narratives in our country. And the best example I think that I could use is the trope of the starving student. When I was in college, everyone believed that it was a rite of passage to be a starving student. There were even professors who would say, well, you're a college student, you should be hungry. But my friends were actually really hungry and didn't have access to CalFresh or, I remember trying to get change with my roommates. We were trying to figure out until our next paycheck to get a sandwich from Carl's Jr., right? And I kind of made a note in my head, like, this starving student thing is dumb and we need to figure out how to change it. And so over the years, it has changed where there's a very real national movement to expand basic needs of college students, because we actually shouldn't want our college students to have to be hungry and can't focus on their education. It defeats the whole purpose. So through storytelling, what we're able to do is kind of allow people to take their own lived experiences and help show and demonstrate why these narratives that we hold near and dear to our American values don't quite make sense. And they're all deeply rooted in this notion of bootstrapping. You have to struggle hard to get somewhere. And we know that's not the America that we want to live in. Those are not the values we want to hold as central values in our country. And so storytelling is very important to shift those. At YI, what we do is each of our young advocates can go through our storytelling training. We go through a lot of like asset-based framing. We don't want anyone to feel traumatized or re-traumatized from anything that they have experienced. And we kind of talk about how to use your personal story to communicate real life experiences and how it's the result of poor policymaking, or if you had a great experience, how it was the result of excellent policymaking and how we want to continue to do those great things.
Excellent. So you have within that a formula of how they can develop their own story, correct?
And we have someone on staff who works with young people on a one-on-one basis, who can help develop their story, tell their story, and utilize their stories to kind of help change policy.
Earlier, you spoke about people not knowing that they can go to City Hall, not knowing that they can go to the state legislature, or that they're allowed to be seen there, let alone have a voice to be able to speak to people and meet with people. How are you using your 500,000 strong network to advocate for these policies? In other words, what advocacy activities do you have in place for them that they participate? Are you doing some what we call on the national level a fly-in into Washington, but are you doing a fly-in, or are you doing state days at the 5 states that you're set up?
Oh, check D, all of the above.
Great.
So we have state policy days every year with our young adults in every state that we operate in. They go visit their state capital. We also have a policy conference every year in each of our states. We also have, we're actually planning for next year, convening for our 15th anniversary, where we'll have a national youth convening as well. So we do all of those things. We partner with other organizations for fly-ins. I don't know if you watched the news back in February, but we had a rally in front of the Supreme Court with hundreds and hundreds of young people in support of student debt cancellation. So we do activate when we need to activate. We partner with organizations. We do a lot of train the trainers for partner organizations to just understand how to effectively communicate and mobilize young people. So D, all of the above is the answer.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that because you can prep people, but if they don't get a chance to really be out and do it, they won't understand.
That's right.
What the impact can be, develop those successes, or break down the barriers that they thought existed.
That's right.
You know, when you go in and you meet with either a member of Congress or a member of the state legislature and anything else, you start to realize, well, they're just like you and me. And that, to me, it has always reinstituted my faith in our institution, that if we do what we should do, which is participate, then, you know, the government becomes ours again.
That's right.
Yeah. There are always challenges and things that are changing. What do you think the biggest challenge is going to be for your community of people, let's say in 5 years and 10 years down the road?
5 years and 10 years down the road. So I'll say one of our current challenges that we're fighting against, and I think we have probably another 2 election cycles, is this notion that young people don't vote. It's just false, but it is embedded in what we like to say in political commentary. And if you actually looked at the numbers, you'll see that young people are beating their own turnout rates every time we have an election. So I think in the next cycle or 2, folks will begin to lose that talking point that young people don't vote. And the challenge will then be ensuring that the new group of young people continue to carry that flag of being solid voters. I think often young people are not considered as strong a voting bloc as they should be.
Well, I know you're aware of the work that John Della Volpe does at the Institute of Politics with the polling that he does through Harvard. And in his latest book called Fight, he actually talks about the group that you're targeted on is the group that will be the most active, at least since the late 60s.
And I agree with that. Young people care deeply about what's going on. Young people are in tune, paying attention, and understand how this whole policy thing is working in the lives of folks on a day-to-day basis. And so, I mean, I don't even know if it properly answers the challenge. I think it's a huge opportunity that I'm really excited to see. And what we're going to have to look at is the age of our electorate and then the age of the representatives. And I think that's going to be where we might see like a source of tension in the future. We might see some real change because of it.
I actually think we're going to see a shift.
Agree.
I'm more positive about where I think the outcome is. I think that there are a lot of people that are catching on to the need for generational balance, income balance, what our entire community looks like, and become more acceptable of that, particularly if they have access to it.
I agree. And, when we think about issue advocacy, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. 10 years ago, former executive director of Young Invincibles wrote an article, and the title was like, "Will student debt ever be a national headline?" Right? No one cared or believed that it was a problem until we get to today, where we actually have multiple presidential candidates running with debt cancellation on their platforms. And the sitting president actually goes to cancel student debt. So if we think about where we were 10 years ago versus where we are today, now granted, the Supreme Court didn't do the thing we wanted them to do, but if we just think about this as a movement, as a campaign, we were very successful in shifting the narrative around student debt and also getting elected officials to listen to us and actually start to make tangible steps toward resolving a problem that was largely held as a young adult issue.
Yeah. And it's a much bigger economic issue than just that.
Absolutely.
What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the word advocacy?
The first thing that comes to mind when I think about advocacy.
The word advocacy. Boom. Yeah. Give me a word that comes to mind when you think of advocacy.
Change.
Okay. And why?
I have always believed that when we advocate for the things that are important to our daily lives, that it will create positive change. I say often, this is my broken record moment, that civic engagement is a verb. So when I think about these types of words, I think about the action that it takes, the steps that we have to take to get from where we are to where we want to be. And I can't help but to think of like decisions and paths that we have to take, going back in the past. The bit that you read about my mom is absolutely true. And now that I'm a mom, I think about my grandma actually, and what her advocacy looked like in the 60s, having to decide, as a young woman, my grandma was in our age demographic at that time and said, "I'm going to send my child to school, not because it's safe, not because I trust the process, but because this is what I need to do to ensure a better future." And so that's something that I've been thinking. I used to really think about this more of like how afraid my mom was, but now I think about it more of how afraid my grandmother had to have been to make that decision, right?
And so how courageous she was.
Yes. And because she knew that these actions would create change, get it all back together. It's about change and bravery, courage, and understanding that you're standing up for more than just yourself.
You touched on this a little bit about what you do to help prepare the network for things. Are you providing, you've got a large group of people all over the country. So do you provide most of this using technology and then jumping on board with webinars and online classes or anything like that?
Yeah, how we deliver is a hybrid model. And I'll say if there was anything that was beneficial from this COVID pandemic, it was us being able to really fine tune what a hybrid model meant for our organization. So we do a lot of virtual workshops, and they're also complemented by in-person activations throughout the country. So all of our offices are statewide offices. They do policy in different cities and areas throughout their state. And we also have, for example, we just had an intern in-person workshop yesterday in Washington, D.C. So it's a hybrid model of how we deliver our work. We do in-person presentations. We partner with colleges and universities, even youth affinity groups for churches. We deploy an outreach strategy. In LA, for example, we partnered with small business barbershops and deployed health insurance literacy information. We partnered with Department of Social Services, and we allowed young men to be able to apply for Medi-Cal. Because when we think about narrative shifts, before ACA, men were not allowed to have Medi-Cal unless they had custody of a child.
Yeah.
ACA made it to where you just had to income qualify. So nobody knew that or believed it, because the long held knowledge was if you were a man, you could not get the health insurance. So we did a barbershop takeover, and we had barbers offering free cuts to people who applied for health insurance. And then we taught people what health insurance meant while they were there. So
excellent.
Yeah, those are the types of activities.
Right down in the grassroots of the community.
Absolutely.
What are the biggest challenges in your job?
My job as an executive director?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of challenges, I would say. I think the biggest challenge is getting funders to understand how important advocacy is and how you can advocate and be 501c3 compliant at the same time. I would say, yeah, that's my top number one on the list.
I'm sorry, people, if you could see this, I was nodding up and down as she was talking about that, because of the confusion of the 501c3s and what you're allowed to do and what people say. And, it's just kind of like understanding what the rules are. Best professional tip you've ever received in your career?
Best professional tip. Not to forget what brought me to the work in the first place.
Perfect way to end this. Kristin, time flies, simply because you and I could have a conversation a lot longer, I think, on this. Any final thoughts, anything you'd like to add?
I guess our website,
Well, I was going to ask you that. How can people reach you? How can they grow that network?
Younginvincibles.org is our website. We're also on Instagram the same way. We are also on TikTok, where, we make tons of fun videos and consumer education, and just follow us online.
Well, that is a wrap of today's fantastic conversation with Kristin McGuire, Executive Director of Young Invincibles. Kristin, thanks for being on the show today. All the best in all the efforts you're doing to be the voice for the young in our country.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's face it, today's advocacy arena is just plain noisy. Organizations are stretched. You need every advantage to make sure your issue gets the attention it deserves and your voice heard. The RAP Index is the best way to do just that by finding your stakeholders' relationships and engagement power. Get past the noise. Know who your people know. Go to rapindex.com. That's rapindex.com, and tell them Roger sent you for a special offer. If you like today's podcast, head over to where you find your podcasts and subscribe to the Voices in Advocacy podcast. A big thank you to today's guest. I appreciate your time and the unwavering passion for advocacy you have. Well, that's it for this episode of Voices in Advocacy. Remember, you have the power to be an effective, influential advocate. Now go out and make it a better world.
We hope you enjoyed today's Voices in Advocacy podcast and look forward to you joining us again next week. To learn more about Voices in Advocacy, go to our website, voicesinadvocacy.com.